It is my pleasure this afternoon to welcome you all to this seminar in honor of and in celebration of Professor Kenneth Magnus, CD. Apologies for the late start. We do have a few persons joining us in the room. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online. With us this afternoon, representing the principal of the Mona campus, is Deputy Principal Ian Bauxite. Our special guest this afternoon is Miss Andrea Magnus, daughter of Professor Kenneth Magnus. Representing the Faculty of Science and Technology, we have with us our Acting Dean, Dr. Shireen James Williamson. There are a number of persons in the audience who are past students of the department, current lecturers in the department, and friends of the department and Professor Magnus. Welcome to you all. Today, we're pleased to celebrate the legacy of Professor Kenneth Magnus. We will be talking about his influence within the university and our wider community as we discuss his life's work in transforming lives, institution, and indeed the economy. We have for you today a number of presentations that will take you through various aspects of Professor Magnus's contribution. Before we get into those presentations, however, I invite Professor Ian Bauxite to bring greetings on behalf of the Mona campus. Professor Bauxite.
Dr. Donna Minot-Cates, head of the Department of Chemistry, Ms. Magnus and other members of the Magnus family, Dr. Shireen James Williamson, who is the acting dean, and as I just said, she is wearing it quite well. Distinguished members of the faculty and indeed the Department of Chemistry, and I note Professor Yvette Jackson, a former PVC, and indeed a very distinguished member of this faculty. There are other members, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished all, Paul, Professor Reese, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to bring greetings on behalf of Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal Dale Weber, who is unavoidably absent today. I'm pleased to bring these greetings on behalf of the Mona campus because today is a special day in which we honor Professor Emeritus Kenneth E. Magnus, CD, and his significant contributions to the development of Jamaica's bauxite, food, and environmental industries and school science educational curricula. In 1977, Professor Magnus established a postgraduate diploma in sugarcane processing that attracted students from the region and as far away as Africa. He was instrumental in establishing the food chemistry program 1980-1981 in the chemistry department, which was in keeping with Jamaica's national move at the time to have an increased emphasis on food processing. The laboratory that now houses the applied chemistry program was named the Kenneth E. Magnus Unit Operations Laboratory in his honor. Throughout his research career, Professor Magnus focused on areas of local interest, which include foods, essential oils, food flavoring, sweeteners, ackee, pimento, sorrel, papaya, sugarcane processing, and food preservation. He also focused on natural products and medicinal plants, as well as bauxite processing and red mud residue. During his retirement, Professor Magnus remained committed to the development of the chemistry department. He continued to teach in the applied and food chemistry programs for at least a decade post-retirement. The importance of capturing the history and contributions of the department did not escape his attention, and he went on to co-author the monograph entitled The Department of Chemistry, UWI Mona, with emphasis on the early years 2010, which was published in 2010. And this was co-authored with Professor Robert Lancashire. It is noteworthy that Professor Magnus instructed that all proceeds from the sale of the book should go towards supporting student prizes and awards in the Department of Chemistry. Just under 2 years ago, one of Professor Magnus's former students, Dr. Conrad Douglas, and his companies, Conrad Douglas and Associates Limited, along with its subsidiary, Environmental Science and Technology Limited, made significant purchases of the book in celebration of their 35th and 25th anniversaries, thus contributing to ongoing student development and recognition. Companies such as these, established by the UWI's Applied Chemistry alumni, could be considered fruits born from Professor Magnus's early commitment to invest in developing programs for furthering our local processing industries and the analytical services that support them. In recognition of his dedication and his sterling service to science development nationally, Professor Magnus had received a number of awards, namely the Pelican Award, that's from the Guild of Graduates, the University of the West Indies, 1966, Centenary Medal, the Institute of Jamaica, 1979, Prime Minister's Award in 1983, the Award for Science Education from the Jamaica Society of Scientists and Technologists in 1985, the Silver Musgrave Medal in 1994, and he also was the recipient of the Order of Distinction Commander Class in 1996. Professor Magnus had and clearly continues to transform lives, institutions, and the economy. The University of the West Indies is tremendously grateful for the contributions of Professor Magnus and his legacy that lives on in chemists he has trained and the lives he has impacted. He was truly a man of great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bauxite. I must apologize. I started off with greetings and welcome and failed to introduce myself. I am Donna Minot-Cates, the current head of the chemistry department. I'd now like to invite Dr. Shireen James Williamson, Acting Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, to bring us greetings on behalf of the faculty.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minot-Cates. Professor Ian Bauxite, Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, Mona, Head of Department of Chemistry, Dr. Donna Minot-Cates, faculty, staff, and students, alumni, and friends of the Department of Chemistry, faculty, staff, and students of the Faculty of Science and Technology, specially invited guests, particularly the daughter of Prof. Magnus, Miss Andrea Magnus, and persons joining us online, good afternoon. On behalf of the FSD and Dean Taylor, it is my esteemed pleasure to be here with you this afternoon on the occasion of the seminar in the honor of and the celebration of Professor Emeritus Kenneth Magnus. While I did not get an opportunity to interact with Prof. Magnus during my early years in the chemistry department, Prof. Magnus retired just a year before I started. His name echoed everywhere. Prof. Magnus can be described as a Caribbean icon, a stalwart of science whose work and commitment live on in rich legacy of scholarship and leadership that he portrayed during his life. The impact of his work has transcended time and space. His service to the faculty and by extension the university was exemplary, and those who knew him have been made better for it. His work was, or you could say is, truly transformative. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the achievements of Prof. Magnus, because there are lots of presentations this afternoon that will define his life and his work, and it will enrich us, I'm certain. But I wanted to underscore that Prof. Magnus charted a course, in conjunction with others, of course, and paved the way for the success of the Department of Chemistry, the success of the Faculty of Science and Technology and the university and Jamaica at large. As I prepared for this greeting, I came across a citation, and it was regarding gallium in Jamaican bauxite. If you know me, you know I'm a geologist. So of course I was absolutely tickled, because not only did this stalwart of science who did almost everything, not only was he in chemistry and every other aspect of Jamaican life, but he was touching geology. And so this work, I saw Tony Greenaway's name there and I was like, oh my God, but this was not so long ago. And I thought that impacting Jamaica through bauxite, it truly caused me to become even more excited than I thought I was, because then I started to read the article instead of preparing for this message. And for him to have impacted nation building at a time when bauxite was king, we were number 2 in the world in Jamaica. It made significant strides in bauxite exploration. And so, I feel like I can identify with Prof. Magnus, even though I didn't follow my chemistry pathway. But it truly is phenomenal the way he has moved through our society, providing his insight and science towards the development of our nation. His work has truly touched every walk of life. The Faculty of Science and Technology takes pride in its aim towards being the go-to place for science. We have encouraged our graduate students, our young researchers, and even those researchers who are not so young anymore, to make that impact on society as individuals, research groups, research project teams, and so on. This was the way of Prof. Magnus. Solutions-oriented, connected to society and society's needs, and trying to solve the problems that existed. In closing, I would just like to say that I hope that this will be the first in a series of Ken Magnus seminars, and that it will become an event we look forward to as we connect chemistry to each other and to society at large, and spend time talking about it within the context of growth, development, and nation building, as we carry on the legacy of Prof. Magnus, a son, a father, and grandfather of the Faculty of Science and Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, the Faculty of Science and Technology welcomes you and bids for you a successful seminar. Thank you.
Me. Thank you, Dr. James Williamson. It falls to me as head of the department, applied chemistry alumna, make that proud applied chemistry alumna, to start off the series of presentation as we delve into the legacy of Professor Kenneth Magnus, a man who selflessly transformed lives, institutions, and the economy. We will be going through a series of presentations as outlined. You all would have received a copy of the program. we will take you through presentations by former students and colleagues looking at his impact across the university, his students, and the wider community, the national economy, and how he engaged alumni in his quest for the development of chemistry and the application of science in the community. Kenneth Eugene was born to Stanley Eugene and Kathleen in 1927. He attended Titchfield Primary, moved on to Camperdown, and then went on to Woolmer's Boys' School, where he attended on a scholarship. And for those of you who know the history of Commonwealth Caribbean, scholarships in those days were very hard to come by, and to have been granted a scholarship to such a prestigious secondary institution was indeed a signal honor. On leaving Woolmer's, Professor Magnus, who as you can see in this photo was talented in more ways than one, went on to have a short sojourn at the Agricultural Chemistry Laboratory as a lab assistant. There, his love of chemistry was able to take root, and he was happy in 1949 to receive a letter of acceptance to the then University College of the West Indies. Much has been said in the past about the first 33 students that attended UCWI, the medical students, but very little is known about the first 11 students who graduated from the UCWI. Professor Magnus was amongst that first 11. His transformation at the University College of the West Indies was not just about transforming the institution from within, but also the changes he himself went through as he attended the university. We see that he moved from being among the first batch of UCWI graduates to gaining his MSc and PhD from the same institution, then a college of the University of London, to becoming a lecturer and moving up the ranks as senior lecturer, professor, and on retirement being appointed Professor Emeritus. Along this academic road, Professor Magnus also served as head of the Department of Chemistry and dean of this faculty. He had a 2-year stint as technical director at the Scientific Research Council, but outside of those 2 years, almost his entire career has been spent at the University of the West Indies. So having accepted his place at the University College of the West Indies, he began his transformative experience in the old wooden buildings that house the Gibraltar refugees. He was one of a small class, and during that time, he formed lifelong friendships. Some of these persons we would hear about, and indeed within the Department of Chemistry, Willie Chan was a former HOD many of us have interacted with over the years. During his studies, he met and married his lifelong partner, Isabel, one of his staunchest supporters, with an independent, energetic, always doing persona, who herself became an adopted chemist, and Ken became synonymous with Isabel. He completed his Bachelor of Science degree in 1952 with first-class honors, being amongst one of 7 who were present in person at the graduation ceremony held in January 1953. With no thought of his story in the making, Professor Magnus went on to do research under the leadership and supervision of Professor Cedric Hassel, the first head of the Department of Chemistry, who had delivered the very first lecture at the University College of the West Indies. We see on screen Kenneth, Kenny, as he's known to his colleagues and friends, with now deceased Professor Wilfred Chan working in the laboratory. Professor Hassel is shown in the inset. Professor Hassel had a work ethic second to none. He indicated to his students that they were expected to be present in the lab from 8 to 5. They were allowed a short lunch break, but thereafter they were expected to retire to the library for at least 3 hours to catch up on the literature. He also believed in publishing, and so as soon as there was work ready to be put out, he insisted that it should be published. Ken isolated, as part of his PhD studies, the antibiotic MonaMedia. He did his MSc at the UCWI, but went on to go to Swansea with Professor Hassel, who accepted a post there. Before that, however, he was a research associate at the UCWI, Junior Research Fellow. In Swansea, Kenneth Magnus completed his PhD. His wife, Isabel, was able to pay a visit while he was there. And so his theses, MSc and PhD, both on MonaMedia, were presented as University of London theses, since we did not become an independent university up to the time of his studies. MonaMedia, by the way, is named for our campus, Mona, and was isolated from a Jamaican strain of Streptomyces, which was found after screening for the causative agent that affected the Panama disease. MonaMedia is still used today in treatment of a number of bacterial infections. It is patented. Unfortunately, in those days, the university did not protect its research in the way we do now. But we are pleased to say that we can claim part of the history of MonaMedia, it having been found here. Ken Magnus returned to the university, starting as a lecturer in 1962. He continued his natural products research, looking at a number of medicinal plants, and there are several publications, and I believe Professor Lancashire has copies of some of these on the desk outside. During that period, the university transitioned from the University College of the West Indies to become an independent university, the University of the West Indies. And we see a copy of a letter to that effect, which was sent in June 1962, acknowledging that transition. So we see the transformation that is taking place throughout the university and indeed throughout Professor Magnus's career. He was promoted to senior lecturer in 1968. Although Ken Magnus appreciated the necessity of pushing the frontiers of knowledge. He did not wish to limit himself to esoteric research. And as the University College was being transformed from the days when Hassel and his colleague, rifle in hand, patrolled the premises nightly to safeguard the premises and the students thereon, the campus was now being transformed into a more built-up campus, into a one which was open to consider movement from that of its origins into more applications. As a now senior academic, Ken was looking for ways in which he could apply his chemistry and transform lives. In keeping with his philosophy of applying chemistry, Kenneth Magnus formulated and launched a final year course in applied chemistry, taking in the first student cohort in 1968. The old chemistry lab was gutted and transformed into a pilot type plant by Ewan Reed and Stanislaw Taddy Logan. This applied chemistry program was in direct response to the needs of the nation at the time, which was calling for technical expertise in the burgeoning mineral processing and chemical sectors and in preparation for the growth of the food industry. The early applied chemistry course saw students being exposed to the main industries in operation in Jamaica at the time. Over a few years, a couple of decades, the applied chemistry course, a single course, morphed into the current applied chemistry major, where we still capture environmental, analytical, the chemical industries, and the management components that Kenneth Magnus deemed necessary for persons going out into industry and being industry ready. He insisted that his students must be exposed to industry, must have hand-on experience, and so students were often taken to quite a number of industries on field trips. And we can see over the years how our students transformed and were transformed as they partook in these field trips. Notwithstanding the undergraduate program, Professor Magnus was also interested in ensuring that his research was of an applied nature. And so we see that Professor Magnus moved from the realms of natural products chemistry per se to looking at natural products in a more applied way as he reviewed, investigated our local and indigenous crop and also looked at our minerals. We will have other presenters this afternoon who will be going in depth about his role in some of these industries, and so I will not say too much on that. Professor Magnus was an author who, from the very beginning of his academic career, has produced a number of books, including what one of his students referred to as a massive book that made him so astonished and proud to be a student of Professor Magnus, given the magnitude of the work. He did not think that books were written by locals, as he saw in the experimental general chemistry text. So from the very beginning of his career, Professor Magnus has been producing books that were locally based, steeped in what we know of the country, all the way up to capturing the history of the campus, as Professor Bauxite referred. As head of the Department of Chemistry, Professor Magnus established a number of programs of local relevance. Notably, he established the elements of food processing, which had its first cohort in 1982. This single course, like its brother-sister program, Applied Chemistry, was to morph into a major and several minors. The Elements of Food Processing course was crafted in conjunction with a number of food technologists who were friends, colleagues of Professor Magnus, and we see two on screen. He created against many of his colleagues. And when I say that, we were steeped in an academic community looking at science in its purest form. That was our history. And Professor Magnus wanted to ensure that science connected to the community, to our needs locally and regionally. And so he fought an uphill battle to ensure that we could implement the analytical, environmental, food, and applied programs over the years. It was, as Anthony Greenaway, former lecturer and head of the applied section, indicated, perhaps his greatest contribution, which in many ways was ahead of a number of other universities around the world at the time. Ever the visionary, Kenneth Magnus recognized the importance not just of transforming science, but of transforming the way in which we process data. He was quick to work with those persons within the department, and here I think of Professor Lancashire and Willard Pinnock, who were some of our early PC unit, in recognizing that we could dramatically increase the way in which we stored and processed data. He himself, however, was not interested in using the technology, but he had no problems in helping those who did. And so we found that under his headship, the Department of Chemistry was one of the first to generate electronic mark sheets, and other departments quickly followed suit. He continued this modernization during his tenure as Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences, working to implement and to facilitate connection of the campus network through persons that he had designated to assist, such as Carmen Layton out of the faculty office. He also recognized that there is much in a name, and he wished for the faculty to include more of its applied type undergraduate programs and research, and he pushed for that to be recognized within the naming of the faculty. And while this did not take place during his deanship, the faculty was eventually renamed Faculty of Pure and Applied Sciences, and today it stands as the Faculty of Science and Technology. Professor Magnus retired and was recognized in the faculty newsletter that he helped to create, as we see on screen. Even after his retirement, Kenneth Magnus continued to demonstrate his active interest in the department, lecturing for a number of years and helping to launch the Friends of Chemistry, ChemSAF, which at its time of launch, he served as chairman. One of the first projects of ChemSAF was to collaborate with the department in constructing the Unit Operations Lab. For many years, up to 1988, the applied chemistry existed in the old wooden buildings. Sadly, these were devastated during Hurricane Gilbert, and the pilot plant equipment that could not readily fit into a room was transported to a corridor, an alleyway between two-story buildings and a makeshift roof put over it. As you can see, students were on top of each other trying to carry out factory-type operations. With the help of one of our applied chemistry alumnus, Dr. Conrad Douglas, who toured the shed, which was a temporary home of the applied chemistry group for 11 years, we were able to move towards constructing a unit operations laboratory. We see Dr. Conrad Douglas serving as the project manager, Professor Magnus, who by then was retired, being actively involved through ChemSAF and through his continued relationship with the department to ensure that this building could go up. Several years after the opening, in recognition of the work that Professor Magnus had done for applied chemistry, the building was renamed in honor of Professor K.E. Magnus, and we recognize his wife, Isabel, and daughter, Andrea, who worked alongside Professor Magnus over many years to allow him to accomplish what he did in the opening of the K.E. Magnus Laboratory. Professor Magnus then had entered the university in a wooden building and had exited the university, the Department of Chemistry, leaving behind a laboratory which stood with his name and his honor. He had transformed chemistry from delivering pure and special chemistry topics only to a whole host of majors and subject areas which spoke to the influence and the impact of chemistry on our community, on our lives. He had also entered in a world of pen and paper and transformed the department and the way it worked into more electronic delivery, facilitating that process. Over the years, he received a number of accolades, and Professor Bauxite has named each of these. We are pleased, in particular, that he received the Silver Musgrave Medal for Science and the Order of Distinction Commander Class. There is a Kenneth Magnus Applied Chemistry Prize, which is offered annually by the department for the top applied chemistry student. And so Professor Magnus went on to maintain his connections to the university, to the Department of Chemistry, and to those colleagues with whom he has interacted from day one. He would always show up for important events at the university and did not forget his colleagues who he worked with over the years. He was instrumental in facilitating the Mona Symposium behind the scenes, along with his wife Isabel and daughter Andrea, who ensured that visitors to the island, whether regional or international, would leave here steeped in the Jamaican culture, having received a very warm Jamaican welcome. The Mona Symposium was established in 1966 and is offered every 2 years in the Department of Chemistry. At our last Mona Symposium, pre-COVID, Professor Magnus was here to celebrate the renaming of the Organic Chemistry Lab in honor of his friend and colleague Wilfred Chan and his former supervisor, Professor Cedric Hassel. We see just the Professor Chan laboratory in the picture. Professor Kenneth Magnus dared to cast a stone, to make a difference, and to selflessly transform lives, institutions, and economy. We thank Professor Kenneth Magnus, and we thank his daughter, who is with us here, for allowing him the time to be with us. We thank Professor Magnus for creating ripples as dean, as head, as lecturer, researcher, mentor, and friend. This presentation this afternoon would not have been possible without a number of persons behind the scenes. Many of the photographs that you see in the presentation were researched and captured by, dare I say, our department's historian and photographer. It's not my role to give the vote of thanks, but we will be receiving presentations from a number of other persons listed on screen. We thank Dr. Novelet Sadler McKnight, who pushed us behind the scenes to ensure this would happen. Dr. Conrad Douglas, alumnus, applied chemistry aficionado, who was a firm believer in everything Ken did and accomplished and would never let us forget the magnitude of the man. And ChemSAF, the Friends of Chemistry, many of whom will be presenting this afternoon. I leave behind the credits as stated by Professor Robert Lancashire, who thanked Ken and Andrea for producing many of the photographs that we have today been able to see. Ladies and gentlemen, I have given you an overview of Professor Magnus's life work. However, there are many details that I am unable to cover and to capture, and so we have asked a number of individuals to speak to the impact of Professor Kenneth Magnus and his transformation in their lives, and indeed the various areas of the industry. Up next, I invite Dr. Lilith Nelson, chemist, educator, businesswoman, and performing artist, to speak to Professor Magnus's transformation of lives.
Honored guests, all graduates of the chemistry department, friends, family, those joining us online. It is my greatest pleasure to present this, I call it as a sort of synopsis of how Professor Magnus has transformed lives. I got information from several people with whom he interacted. And out of what they responded, their responses, I was able to identify 7 main threads which are woven into the tapestry of some of the memoirs submitted by individuals who have benefited from interaction with Professor Magnus. So I present what they say about him as teacher, mentor, colleague, or friend. And we got 15 persons sending in their comments and their memoirs. But of course, you can imagine 15 people are just a drop in the bucket, comprising the myriads of lives transformed by Professor Magnus. Now, the 7 threads which emerged from what they said were summarized as follows. Professor Magnus is caring, approachable, and dedicated as he served as an educator. Another thread was his supportive, encouraging, and motivating role as a mentor. Then his span of vision, which included development of science education at various levels, tertiary, secondary, and primary levels, as well as training and development of teachers. His innovation and encouragement of others. His championing the growth and development of women in the field of science as they take their rightful place in academic leadership and excellence in other spheres. His humility and his hospitality, of course, along with his dear wife Isabel and with Andrea, his daughter, as well as building and maintaining camaraderie and lasting friendships with individuals. So, this thread, his caring, approachable, and dedicated service as an educator. Sonia Allen, who was Jamaica's first female brewmaster. Now, that's a different thing from Joyce Spencer. She recalls that Dr. Ken Magnus advised and confirmed her registration with a smile and a chuckle when she decided to do chemistry, not having been exposed to chemistry before, and that he gave her so much help as she went through the courses. Even sometimes she thought simplifying his lectures so that she and some others who were like her could understand. So she said he was always encouraging, and even when she thought she asked inept questions. And so she'll be forever grateful for his approach to teaching. Dr. Merle Barrett, who is a nutrition specialist and lately entered into the field of pharmacy, she said she was first introduced to Dr. Magnus in the mid-60s as a young undergraduate. And he was dedicated, she thought, as a lecturer in the chemistry department. And so she said she noticed that he always tried to encourage excellent scholarship. And Professor, the Honorable Elsa Leorini, who you know is Professor Emerita now of the university, and she was the first female principal of the Mona campus. She says she remembers that one of her first sets of, her first lecturers as was Kenneth Magnus, Dr. Kenneth Magnus. She was one of the first set of students who was taught by the young Magnus in the 60s. And she recalls that she was bewildered by the subject, chemistry, but somehow she managed to learn under his feet. And Dr. Magnus, she said, was approachable, patient, and gifted as a teacher. And so for her, he unraveled a lot of the mysteries of chemistry. I myself remember him as a lecturer I was here between 1963 and 1967. That's way back in the dark ages. But I remember Professor Magnus, that because of his exposing us to carbohydrate chemistry, that laid the foundation for me to go on to love organic chemistry and to end up teaching chemistry at the high school level and focusing a lot on organic chemistry. I found him father-like when it came to his interest in students, encouraging and patient. Now, he also encouraged me to become active in other spheres, which will come up later. Radley Reed, who did applied chemistry with Dr. Magnus, and is, a noted educator in our society, says when he came to the University of the West Indies, he thought that Professor Magnus was different from a lot of the lecturers with whom he interacted. He said not only was he a good lecturer, but he was, you see that word approachable, keeps coming up. And people thought he was approachable, interested in the progress of the students. In fact, he thought of him as a mentor and an advisor. Dr. Shirley Thomas, who was the first woman to be awarded a PhD in chemistry at the University of the West Indies, and from whom I think you're going to hear later, she thought that Dr. Magnus was known as one teacher who could be approached. You notice that word coming up over and over again, approachable. He could be approached with any problem. And she said he was the person to whom she would go for explanations and help when she was grappling with sticky situations. Now, Vilma McLennan said when she tried to look invisible on entering the chemistry room when Dr. Magnus was giving his lecture, she would be tiptoeing and trying to be invisible. And he would just turn around and say, "Late again, Miss McLennan, but you haven't missed much." You notice calmly, not berating her for being consistently late, but somehow in that father-like way. And she said he actually was the person. You'll never forget that she was doing a chemistry lab, and somehow she saw Dr. Magnus dash from his desk down to her and proceeded to beat upon her head because what? Her hair was on fire because she had leaned too close to the Bunsen burner. And she said she'll never forget that. But she said, despite the fact that chemistry still holds a lot of mysteries for her, she graduated and she went on thanks to Dr. Magnus. Now, Vilma also said that from him she learned that science, about the process of science, not just the subject science, but how to go about things scientifically in a project work. And she said that it was because of his guidance that she was able to become a good adjudicator in the Association of Science Teachers of Jamaica School Science Exhibition. She learned a lot about how to question the children who were exhibiting their projects without scaring them. And she said from interacting with him and others of his ilk, she aspired to be a good science educator. Now, we move on to the second attribute, supportive, encouraging and motivating role as a mentor. Dr. Jean Dixon, former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education, Industry, Technology, Energy and Commerce, in the Ministry of Health as well. Sorry. When the air conditioner is on, it dries out my throat. I'm very sorry. Former executive director of the SRC. She says the lasting memories she has of Professor Magnus are of him being a good listener and an encourager and someone ready to suggest options to resolve problems. In 1987, she said she had 3 days' notice to prepare to face a panel to defend her PhD. And she was in a panic. And she said she went to Prof. Magnus, and he referred her to Professor, someone who she thought everybody was afraid of, You heard about him, Professor Willa Chan, and the rest is history. Well, I'm mixing up, I'm sorry, Dr. Jean Dixon with Professor Yvette. Actually, he quieted her. He listened to her quietly and in a calm voice told her that she knew more about what she was going to present and defend than anybody else, so she should not be afraid. That's what happened to Jean Dixon. Now, onto Professor Yvette Jackson, former Pro-Vice Chancellor for Graduate Studies and Research at the UWI, and past campus coordinator for Graduate Studies and Research. She said shortly before she was due to write her thesis, her supervisor resigned and migrated. And then she found that, of course, she needed, time was going and she needed some help. Professor Magnus appointed her co-supervisor, Willie Chatton, and the rest is history. Now, Vilma also remembers that when she got the Musgrave Medal, the Silver Musgrave Medal, Professor Magnus left his home, drove to the campus, and opened his car door, came across to her at UWI, and proceeded to give her a big congratulatory hug. Now, Radley Reed, who many of you probably know as an educator, said it was Professor Magnus who assigned him to Dennis and Geddes for his summer practicum. And that rich experience was one he'll never forget. And Professor Magnus encouraged him, even helped him to obtain the information he needed to come up with a certain text and for them. And he said this manual was produced, and he really will always thank Professor Magnus. Dr. Joyce Spence, the world's first female master blender, she said that he was a father and mentor to her. His never-ending passion for the sugar industry somehow steered her to her destiny. And he was always giving guidance, she said, and until this day, she can never forget that special walk where she had to be running to catch up with him in order to give her some special advice. And she said she visits his home. She used to visit his home quite regularly, and she was always welcome. And so he left an indelible mark on her. So this Conrad Douglas, as you have heard over and over, I think he felt he couldn't come here and speak because he would have been overwhelmed with emotions because he was so close to Professor Magnus. He said he recalls his first encounter in 1967 in his N2 organic lab. And he was busy washing up his glassware forever and ever and ever. And Professor Magnus kind of said to him, come on, you need to get on with the work. And he said, no, he just continued to wash his things and lay out his things. And, and he said it was the confidence that enabled him to apply the principles, thank you so much, to the establishment of his own company, Conrad Douglas and Associates. There's something you do when you sing. Even when your throat is very dry, you breathe deep and you talk over it. So that is what I tried to do in order to overcome this. So Conrad says he sees himself in part as a product of Professor Magnus's far-reaching insights, helpful suggestions, unending wisdom. And he thought of him as a great man, contributed a lot to his own professional development. And he says he remembered an occasion as a graduate student when when Professor Magnus was walking him back to his car and noticed that his tires were really dismal and actually said, no, you need new tires. And guess what? Professor Magnus actually bought the new tires for him. Isn't that something? So he said he will never forget that kindness. Now, his span of vision, which included the development of science education at the tertiary, secondary, and primary levels, as well as training and development of teachers. Dr. Merle Barrett who remembers him now, that when she came back to Jamaica after completing her doctoral studies, he approached her and asked her to become a part-time lecturer in the elements of food processing. She had done her PhD in nutrition. And she said that course she developed and inaugurated in 1978. And it was a third-year program. And she said several years later, the Bureau of Standards had engaged with the University of Maryland to deliver a special program. And Dr. Magnus, with his usual visionary insight, initiated collaboration with the University of Maryland to have a better process control school delivered in Jamaica in the chemistry department at UWI. Professor Marlene Hamilton said, well, she was head of Department of Educational Studies here at the university. She had been charged by the Ministry of Education and other sources to do something about improving the quality of science education at the primary and secondary levels, impacting both students and teachers. And she said she had a series of discussions, consultations with Professor Magnus, and she said he promptly offered, through his prodding, threats, pleading, and things like that, all the help she needed. And as a result of this, she was able to get the teachers motivated. She was able to get some change in the chemistry and other science areas in the high schools and in the primary schools, and among the teachers especially. So she says while everybody tends to see him as an applied chemist now, he's steeped in his work in bauxite and sugarcane industries. There was also a strong commitment to science at the school level and to the proper development of teachers of the subject. Okay? She refers to his caring nature and his keen awareness, thank you, of the country's need and commitment for a better society through science at all levels. Wilma McLennan also refers to the fact that Professor Magnus was the one who pulled her into the Association of Science Teachers of Jamaica to take a leadership role and propelled her so that she could have made a difference in that, through that entity. Okay, she has made a difference. There are some of her books, Science Education. Now, I myself learned a lot from Professor Magnus, and he also pulled me into the Association of Science Teachers of Jamaica, the Jamaican Society of Science and Technology, and later on into ChemSAF. Radley Reed says on graduating, Professor Magnus asked him, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm going to teach. And he was an applied chemistry graduate, and he was going to teach. But what do you think? Professor Magnus did not discourage him. He said to him, you know, about 5% of what you learn here at the university, you'll probably use when you go out there. So go, make a difference. Go and teach. And he did. Sorry. Not only am I drinking the water, but I'm bathing myself with it. What can I tell you? So Radley Reed ended up teaching chemistry, going as an educator, being a principal of one of the leading schools, and the rest is history. Now, Basil Burke, who has his own company and is operating out of California, says that in his early years, he saw Professor Magnus, he worked with him over a period of time. He said from 1963, when he joined the faculty, he was a student in 63, and he went up to join the faculty in 72. He watched Professor Magnus morph, he says, from being his tutor in alkaloid chemistry to being a visionary and administrator, and ultimately a historian of chemistry at Mona. And so he said that he really deserved the honors he got from Jamaica. Shifting, he says, from the alkaloid chemistry to his visions for the bauxite chemistry, applied chemistry, food chemistry, and beyond. Now, Professor Magnus, the innovator, innovation and encouragement of others to follow his lead towards the application of chemistry in areas of society, spanning industry, food technology, and economic development. Well, I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about this from other speakers. But Sonia Allen remembers that he was very interested in the fact that she studied in Holland to be a brewing chemist and to become Jamaica's first female brewmaster for Heineken. And she said he discussed this often with her and even thought about possible areas like that to be explored at the UWI. And Merle Bard says he was always seeking to have the graduates of applied chemistry take their rightful place in industry, contributing, of course, to national development. And that Mona really holds him a debt of gratitude. Jean Dixon recalls that he maintained keen interest in the work of the Scientific Research Council. You heard that he was actually the director for 2 years. And in particular, in the work of the Food Technology Department. And he was always available, she said, to discuss issues with her. And she thought that he had a very leading role to play in the business of the color of the sorrel chutney, a product which was eventually commercialized. And Dr. Novelet Sadler McKnight, she said, his legacy is far-reaching for its impact on transforming lives and developing solutions to many problems faced by industries in Jamaica through, of course, the applied and food chemistry programs for which the chemistry department is best known now. And she lauds the impact he had on her life. Conrad Douglas just has to keep saying that suffice it to say that summer interim at Alpart, where he worked, was something which changed his life so much. And he says, Professor Magnus, he worked as a consultant and project manager in several United Nations organizations, and his span of has gone beyond Jamaica, beyond the Caribbean, and to the wider world. And he alludes all of this, he says all of this is due to the guidance and the leadership he got from Professor Magnus. And Radley Reed says that when he also thought that a lot of what he accomplished as an educator was due to Professor Magnus. I like something he said. He says he had the vision to prepare his chemistry graduates to hit the ground running and be prepared for work and to excel. Now, Professor Magnus championed in the growth and development of women in the field of science, in academic leadership, and other spheres. Professor Jackson says Ken was a strong believer of women becoming academics before it became fashionable. So he wholeheartedly supported their appointment and tried to encourage them in their endeavors, development, and progression up the academic ladder. And Dr. Sadler McKnight also underlined this, and she pays tribute to his strong belief in the potential of women as leaders. She says something is indelible in her mind all the time. He keeps saying, if you want to get a job done and done well, give it to a woman. And that still echoes in her mind. So she lauds Professor Magnus for the stellar role he played in involving women in decision-making and leadership in the department. And it went beyond tokenism. And in fact, she alludes to the current head of department, who actually was one who Dr. Magnus saw long ago, identified her, and wasn't he right? Okay, so his humility. Several people commented about Dr. Magnus' or Professor Magnus' humility. Sonia Allen says she's happy that something is being done in his memory because he never claimed accolades and fame. And he was a gentle giant, she thought. Radley Reed says he was a humble man, a man of dignity, exemplar, more than a lecturer, excellent teacher, visionary, great Jamaican, guided, mentored, counseled, and taught so many people. And Jean Dixon says it's remarkable that someone who was so knowledgeable could exhibit so much humility. And, oh, sorry. Yes. And finally, his hospitality, not his last but not least, hospitality along with his wife Isabella and his daughter Andrea, as well as building and maintaining camaraderie and lasting friendships with individuals of all ages. Sonia Allen refers to the many times that she interacted with Professor Magnus and his wife in their home, and with Andrea, his daughter. And Basil Burke says that with his wife Isabel and his daughter Andrea, his house was a great hosting site, especially for people who visited the Natural Products Symposium, which became the Mona Symposium, which since 1966 was a flagship international chemistry meeting in the Caribbean and Latin America. He will be remembered, he said, and greatly missed. Professor Willem Mulder says, the physical chemist here at the university, says, when he came to Jamaica first, he was already close to, Professor Magnus was already close to retirement. So he did not have a lot of experience in terms of his academic activities and so, but he remembers that Professor Magnus was the person who promoted cohesion among the staff. And he said, the coffee hours, he will never forget those daily coffee hours and the lively discussions that took place in, for all topics, scientific topics and topics of all sorts. And that Professor Magnus used to encourage him to go to the Philip Sherlock, to the senior common room at the time, to sit down on a Friday evening and have a chat. And many of us here know about those Friday evening chats. Dr. Minot, okay? So then, ladies and gentlemen, all these threads, look at this tapestry, 7 threads in this tapestry, which is, of course, the 7 threads of the rainbow. And thank you, Dr. Sadler McKnight, for finding this beautiful piece of tapestry of hope. And, all these threads shared by students, mentees, colleagues, and friends of Professor Magnus reflect the richness of the tapestry of his life, which left a legacy of hope and value in the fabric of our country, our region, and the wider world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson. As you can see, Professor Magnus has meant much to a lot of persons who have interacted with him, from his first students who have not forgotten him, and those colleagues who continue to hold him in high regard. Up next, we will move into the segment where we look on Professor Magnus's impact on the economy, looking at his work in terms of pimento, and I invite Dr. Shirley Thomas. And as Dr. Nelson added, our first PhD graduate from the Department of Chemistry. That would have been University of the West Indies.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. I thank the organizers for inviting me, and I have just a very brief glimpse for you of the really technical chemistry side. I don't know if all of you are chemists, but we go into a little, not much chemistry here. The interesting thing about this is also the background in agriculture. Ken certainly had his fingers in everything. He obtained this grant to work on the pimento industry in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, and the idea was to develop the pimento industry in Jamaica. The collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture was in helping them to develop the best possible, highest quality pimento product. Mr. John Gale, who everybody called Johnny Gale, was the person from the Ministry of Agriculture who was involved with, in charge of the project, really. Mr. Gale knew pimento. And I put down that he was probably associated with every single pimento tree in the island at the time. And that may not be too far from the truth. He had a special tree that he discovered somewhere near Mandeville that had a totally different aroma profile from regular pimento. And Ken got excited and we all got interested in finding out more and developing this. I think he did some propagation, and I don't know if any product from that tree is still available, but it was so much excitement. So with Kenneth in the lab, we did the analyses, and the idea was that the Jamaican product should continue to be the best. At the time, it was the only one and the best one, and that it should continue to be the best, highest selling pimento product in the world. So we were extracting the oil, which was never done in Jamaica at that time. All the berries were collected and sent off to the mother country, where the oil was extracted and sold. The growers, there were a number of really large growers, producers at the time, and their berries formed the bulk of the material that was sent off. The main product the main component that we were looking at was the eugenol content. And in fact, the berry oil producers in the UK based a lot of their quality measurement on eugenol content. This picture shows the pimento orchard, a pimento orchard that was produced from the trees that were propagated based on our analyses here. Oh. Okay. What Mr. Gale was able to do was to propagate pimento as it had never been done before. It used to be plants were grown from seed, and nobody knew what the plant would produce until it produced. And they took the berries and dried them, sent them, distilled them, etc. No, he was able to produce plants from existing plants. He was able to propagate vegetatively so that they knew what the new plant would produce. And these orchards were prepared. and were doing extremely well. Also, he was able to get bearing pimento trees in 3 years instead of 5, 6, 7. And you see this small tree that used to bear profusely, and that was a great improvement over the situation. I was working as a postdoc with Ken at the time, and we reported to the Natural Products Institute in London. They were funding the project, and we did the work, sent the reports to them, as well as working with the Ministry of Agriculture here in Jamaica. The results were used mainly by the Ministry of Agriculture. The Natural Products Institute in London, they did quite a bit of research on their own, on components of pimento oil, which we didn't do that here. They published on the components. So we were involved mainly with the quality product. This is just an example of the gas chromatograms that were done at the time, which were used to look at the different types of oil and the different quality oils and what was preferred, so that the trees being propagated would represent the pimento that was selling the most, the highest quality selling pimento. It seems not so long ago that I spent a lot of time at Professor Magnus's house with Andrea and Professor Magnus and Mr. Johnny Gale, writing this book on pimento that was authored by Mr. Gale. He thought it was important to record the process that had been done when pimento was at the height, because there was a decline, and he wanted it to be remembered that there was a time when the pimento was such an important crop. So we got the book done between Johnny, Ken, and I. Ken insisted on putting some of these gas chromatograms in the book so that it ended up with my name somewhere on the inside. The book was produced by the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, and it was done as a free book. It's on the internet for anybody to access, and the copies that were produced in Jamaica were donated to libraries, institutions, and whoever was interested. So there's the address if anybody is interested in following up on this book. And here is just a picture of the cover. I should have done the back cover where Professor Ken Magnus wrote his comments on the book and on the author and on the work, because he was a real driving force in the production of this book. And he, talking about his humility, he really did the work, stayed in the background, and let everybody else take the credit for his vision, his drive, and his dedication. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Of course, Professor Magnus contributed much not just to the pimenta stories, but to essential oils. We do have one of our graduates, Dr. Lyndon Johnson, who unfortunately is not with us this afternoon. He is hoping that he will make it to be able to give his presentation, but there were some traveling difficulties. And Dr. Lyndon Johnson went on to work as a graduate of the Applied Chemistry program, went on to work in the essential oils industry and has his own company, another fruit of Professor Magnus's labor. Professor Magnus, as you have heard, contributed much to the development of the bauxite and alumina industry through the Applied Chemistry program. Up next, we have a graduate of the Applied Chemistry program and lecturer in the Department of Chemistry, Dr. Michael Coley, who will reflect on the legacy of Professor Kenneth Magnus in the industry and the development of the industry proceeding from the work that has been done through the department and its graduates. Dr. Michael Coley.
Good afternoon. You know, Prof. Magnus looked more like the picture on your right when he taught me. And then eventually he became the distinguished professor who just embodied confidence. In between, you can see that picture that represents the bauxite alumina industry. And his view was chemistry should be such that it contributed to national development. And hence, he wanted to have a lot of work done in areas that would contribute to national development. Now, UWI has always been involved in unlocking Caribbean potential. It's just what UWI does. And it does so through several different means. Programs and courses, technical and national discussions, through innovative research and development, and through what we describe as transformational leadership. I saw Prof. Magnus as a transformational leader, not just because he developed the applied chemistry program, which, yes, demonstrates his involvement in programs and courses, not just because he led industry-related research, but also because he had that interest in collaboration between industry and UWI, and finding that way to make it work. I'll tell you just a little bit about the applied chemistry program. Now, that program had some key course components. Certainly, it was applications-based, but it required one doing all the chemistry that would be typical of a regular chemistry graduate. Essentially, you simply built the applications of chemistry on top of the regular chemistry that would be required of you to learn. There are several key aspects that would be focused on. Primarily, industry components, local industries. Bauxite and sugar would be emphasized, and there would be course components that were relevant to that. But then we also did process economics, interesting subject for a chemist. But through that, one got an appreciation of the economics relevant to keeping a business operational, how one assessed profitability, how one looked at just how industry has to be profitable in order to keep it functioning. We also looked at the engineering principles. Why is that important? According to Prof. Magnus, the chemist is going to be generating data that engineers who are running a process are going to be using. But how will the chemist interact and communicate with engineers if you have no understanding of the concepts of engineering? And hence he thought it critical that chemists should understand heat transfer, material balance, just how materials move within an industrial process. And hence, we did courses which would be typically done within a regular chemical engineering program. But then there was more. He believed that in order for a new graduate in chemistry to function efficiently and effectively as an applied chemist, especially in a context where Jamaica did not have a chemical engineering program, all our chemical engineers would have to be trained in Trinidad. And many of them got jobs there and remained there. He wanted to see industry flourish, and hence he believed that the applied chemists should be schooled in the operations of industry locally. And hence, we would visit several different industries, and he would lead those trips. We had to write a report afterwards, but of course, the impact would have been significant. Beyond the industrial visits, we also had to do an industrial internship, and of course, there would have been industry-related research. How did Ken Magnus's impact on the Bayer process chemistry and the industry really start? Well, back in 1969, Conrad Douglas and Glenn Nemhard were sent to be interns at Alpart. And they were assigned, well, let's call it sophisticated equipment that they had to commission for use within the process. At that time, Alpart was just about producing their first batch of alumina. They set up the equipment, they did the analyses and found that the quality of the alumina was substandard. And hence, they had to now evaluate not just the product, but relate it to the elements or the components of the bauxite and aspects of the process that would have caused the high levels of impurities that they found. Good work led to more work. And perhaps I'll tell you just a little bit about Ken Magnus' impact in, well, as it interfaced with Conrad Douglas. And I'll tell you why. There are several graduates who would have worked under Ken Magnus within the bauxite alumina sector. We can't tell you about all of them, but we'll use one to just give you a little snapshot, a little example. While Conrad Douglas would have been working with another professor within the department, that is Dr. Harry Cleghorn, doing polarography studies, Ken Magnus shouted to him one day and simply said, "Look, Conrad, Alcan is having a big problem. We believe that you can assist the department and them in tackling it." Conrad Douglas agreed. Of course, being the disciplined son of a police sergeant, you'd expect no less. After an agreement between Alcan and UWI Chemistry, Conrad was awarded a scholarship, and of course he went off to begin his MSc. That would involve working, well, carrying out lab work at Alcan Kirkvine and at Alcan Yorton, and using their technical information center, and of course doing some work at UWI. During that era, Alcan would have a little plane, a little airplane that would fly between Tinspen and Kirkvine and Yorton and back over into Kingston. Interesting ride in that small plane, having experienced it myself. Now, his work with Kirkvine went very, very well. In 3.5, 4 years, he was able to graduate with his PhD, looking at sodium adsorption on red mud. And what he was able to do is to come up with some conclusions that could assist the company. Not only were they able to use a material balance approach to solve the sodium adsorption problem, but of course he also developed some methods for determining or, well, assessing contamination of wells that would have been impacted by bauxite waste. There's so much to speak about Conrad Douglas himself. I won't go into the details except to tell you two things. One, he joined the company, Alcan, after his PhD as a technical development officer. And after 2 years, Alcan had a major problem. There was a big strike. The company was shut down for 6 weeks. And of course, things changed within the process plants. They brought in researchers from Arvida. They brought in experts from elsewhere. They could not solve the problem. And this problem was actually costing $10 million per week. Conrad told them that, hey, look, I can help. I have a solution. They ignored him. After 3 weeks, when nothing else worked, they came to him and said, tell us your idea. He demonstrated what the problem was, developed a way to fix it, and of course the company was able to go on to restart. He has been involved and throughout in establishing JBI and of course developing the process plant that's there. Recently, he made a donation to the department so that other students can continue to benefit. Here's what we could describe as the Ken Magnus model. And that model is just super interesting. He was talented at identifying industrial problems and challenges. But with that, he also would find an ideal student, pair that student with one or two very capable supervisors, academic supervisors, and in addition, have a few industrial persons who would assist with advising and directing the projects. That we call the Magnus model, simply because it worked and worked so well. He stood in the background and watched things work, always being the humble person, just getting things done. The legacy, we don't have time to describe it. We could tell you about Ensel Brown and Deidre Tucker and Andrea Blackwood, who would have graduated with PhDs. We could mention Joel, who recently got her PhD. We could talk about Kadeen and Alicia. We could talk about Shakia and Howard, who are working in the United Arab Emirates running their lab, or about Kemar, who is at UC Rizal in Yoatan, or Denise Dawkins Tomlinson, who is running the lab at Jamalco. Literally everywhere you turn within the local bauxite industry and also in Australia and the United Arab Emirates, the sons and daughters would have benefited academically from Prof. Magnus, his work and his legacy is well known. No fanfare. That's not Prof. Magnus's style. His style was always quiet, simple, gentle, but impacting students significantly. We continue to try to do that today, and each year we still place 20 to 25 interns in industry, even during the pandemic. We still collaborate with industry, and of course, we still take our students on a number of field trips each year. You know, the bauxite industry is served by a model that works, and we call it the Ken Magnus legacy model. He's the one who conceptualized how we operate. And hence we say, as we extract alumina from Jamaica's crust, we process the dirt and we manage the dust. Inspired by Ken, we put Jamaica first. We celebrate you, Professor Kenneth E. Magnus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coley, for so aptly putting Professor Magnus's legacy and his contribution and continued impact on the bauxite and alumina industry in context for us. But Professor Magnus also contributed significantly to the development of the food industry. And so this afternoon we invite a graduate of the Applied Chemistry and the Food Chemistry program, Dr. Ian Thompson, who will come and talk to us about the food and beverage industries. Dr. Thompson is a lecturer in the Department of Chemistry.
Wow. Thank you. Prof. Magnus' legacy is certainly impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this series of presentations. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to be able to give this brief account of Prof. Magnus's impact on the food industry. Prof. Magnus was my lecturer, co-supervisor, and academic advisor. And I would also like to recognize Prof. Jackson in the audience, who was my other co-supervisor for my PhD project on rum. Now, in preparing for this presentation, I must admit that, there were things which I learned which I was not aware of before. And I think as well, many of us at the end of this presentation would in fact have been pretty impressed with the breadth of Prof. Magnus's involvement in the various industries across Jamaica. Now, I won't regurgitate a number of the things which has been said before, but the theme which I'd like to use to run through this presentation is that tall oaks from little acorns grow. We have already acknowledged that Prof. Magnus was one of the first graduates, and in fact, with respect to the tradition of excellence within the department, I think it's fair to say that Professor Cedric Hassel is generally regarded as the father of the Department of Chemistry, and Prof. Magnus, Ken Magnus, among others, would have been his first children. Many of us who had completed the Applied Chem program would have fond memories of the building in which we had lectures. That building is now replaced by the Founders Park, which you can see in the image to the left. And of course, Prof. Magnus's name is present as one of the first graduates from the faculty. Prof. Magnus's involvement in the local industry really had a significant impact. And to put this into some context, one should recognize that at the time of independence, Jamaica had just progressed from a largely agrarian society, where we had demonstrated our capacity to produce significant agricultural commodities. And in this post-independent period, we certainly wanted to move beyond primary agricultural products and move towards value-added products. Today, we call them value-added. At that time, the expression was more to gain self-sufficiency. So we also had a long tradition of using agricultural products as a basis for a number of our research projects. One of the things which stuck to me as one of his students, grad students, and it has been stated before, was his humility, this understated and humble nature. And we all know and we've heard that he was a master social networker. But one of the things which I also noticed in our many drives to Wren Nephew for project meetings, when the matter of politics came up, he would actually also have an opinion. And the reality is that I recall very distinctly, he would repeatedly make this statement: people get the government they deserve. At first I thought this was a partisan statement, but it wasn't. The reality was that it is not that people deserve bad government, but it is that people need to hold their governments to account. And rather than complain, have them hold their feet to the fire, as it were. And the question is, do we deserve our government? Or is it that we haven't been doing our part? Of course, many before me have spoken about his visionary attributes. So, in summary, Prof. Magnus, from his thoughts, words, actions, and habits, it informed his character. I'd like now to segue into the Cedric Hassel Awards. Now, these awards started back in 1971. And I'm singling out 3 awardees at this point, namely Patrick Duncan, Joy Bateman, now Spence, and Anne-Marie Talbot, now Smith. Now, as a young undergraduate in the chemistry department, acquiring or being awarded the Cedric Hassel Prize was akin to receiving the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. It was that difficult. So that these individuals were gifted. And we have, them among us today. But recall that in these days, we didn't have smartphones, internet, computer, Hell, we didn't even have a banger. And these students excelled. So when I polled these students, Patrick Duncan, who is currently the COO of his own company, Jam Hill Food and Beverage Limited, he pointed to the fact that trained graduates can best appreciate the increasing demand that local and international regulatory requirements impose on the food industry. So we need trained graduates out there who are aware, and we have produced those. Also, interestingly, Anne-Marie Smith indicated that of the innovations which Prof. Magnus introduced, certainly she believed that the inclusion of management courses in a blended chemistry degree with management studies was one of the most significant developments within the department, in addition to, of course, the food processing program, which started in 1981, 82. She's now the managing director of her own company, Anilu Mixes. Of course, there was Joy Spence, Dr. Joy Spence. And I have here accolades too many to mention. I think everyone is aware of her accomplishments. And most recently, she had been awarded the Discus Award, Lifetime Achievement Award in the US. The point for raising these awardees is that from the very beginning, even before the food program had begun, our graduates certainly had this capacity to excel in whatever industry that they were placed. And certainly for these graduates, they chose the food and beverage industry. So when did the era of food processing begin at the university in the Department of Chemistry? It turns out that it was 1982. And the image here of Ake is significant, and we'll see why. It was also important that as far as the program was concerned, it was infused with persons who had industry experience. This immediately gave it credibility. So there was James Rawle, Alwyn Lynch, Pete Scott, Miss Hope Carr, Dr. Barnett, Dr. Trevor Yee, and of course, Mrs. Beverly Miller. Of note is that, and in the next few slides, I will present some of the tributes and achievements of the graduates from the decades, the 4 decades since the program started. Of note, Dr. Gordon attributes Prof. Magnus to singularly introducing this program and being one of only 12 students in the first cohort that changed the trajectory of his academic pursuits. Interestingly, Dr. Gordon was also credited with, among other things, lifting the 27-year ban on Akis, on the US, on the entry of Jamaican Akis into the US. Now, if you know anything about Akis in the diaspora, Jamaicans must have Akis. And before the ban was lifted, Akis would take a route via Canada and then into the US. And believe you me, I am aware. But beyond that, there's also Everton Younger, the class of '87, who also made significant contribution to the food industry through his involvement with Grace Kennedy and Red Stripe. Also of note, another graduate. And here I must pause to recognize Dr. Jose Jackson Mallet, who was also a Cedric Hassler awardee in the class of 1990. And she recounts that the primary reason why she came to UA in the first place was the fact that, the food processing minor was being offered. Dr. Jackson Mallet is now the co-director of the Alliance for African Partnerships and also the recipient of a Bill and Melinda Gates funded project. Of course, our own Dr. Andrea Wilson Barnaby, who is a prolific researcher and program coordinator for the master's program in food and agro-processing technology. She recalls that Prof. Magnus was very passionate about chemistry and sharing his knowledge. And I can go on. There's Dr. Sharon Hooper, who is now also at Michigan State and a member of the U.S. Bean Council. There's Ms. Katie Sims, who serves as a product development and research scientist at the Scientific Research Council, who incidentally had intended to start her program in medicine, but was so intrigued and fell in love with chemistry, especially food, that she switched. And more recently, once we had started the master's program in food and agro-processing technology, we have seen this increased interest in some of our graduates to improve their skills. So there's Monique Ellis from Grace Kennedy. There's Kelly Simon Brown, who is now in Canada, working on a blend of mushrooms with coffee. Of course, there is Janoy Kelly, who, even though he had not done the undergraduate program, had moved to complete the master's program and is now in the UK working with Tate and Lyle. Imagine that. Of course, current industry practitioners have also accounted for the significance of Ken Magnus' work. There's James Rawle. There's Dr. Velton Gooden, the current ED at the Bureau of Standards, and Jerome Miles from Rainforests, all who have indicated the importance of having trained graduates to navigate the complex and increasingly important regulatory framework. So how have we grown since then, since 1982? We have continued to train graduates through the Better Process Control School. We also have been involved in training PCQI practitioners. We've introduced a graduate program since 2012, and we had stimulated the creation of a pilot plant in 2016. So Prof. Magnus' legacy is strong, and I would say that it lives on. And I would close by saying that we salute his contribution and honor the pioneering work and vision, and that dreams like acorns, when tended carefully, will grow to mighty as the oak. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. We have walked across the industries that Professor Magnus has impacted. We've seen the graduates, we've seen the practitioners, many of whom are past students of the programs that Professor Magnus had the foresight to develop. But Professor Magnus was not limited to just the programs that were ongoing in the department. He continued his interaction with the students beyond the classroom and engaged alumni, being there at the beginning when the Chemistry Friends, or Friends of Chemistry, ChemSAF, was launched. Today we have with us Mr. Patrick Duncan, President of ChemSAF, who will speak to the legacy of Professor Magnus engaging alumni. Mr. Duncan.
Greetings, everyone. Let me just make a small correction at the very beginning. I have successfully avoided being president of ChemSAF since its inception. That honor is due to, you've heard his name like about 100 times this afternoon, Dr. Conrad Douglas, okay? So I'm just Patrick Duncan, an alumni member, okay? I guess we have saved the best for last. I'm the last presenter, so let's see what I can do to keep you all awake. The presentation today, besides highlighting the major achievements of ChemSAF, wants to look at the key role alumni play in the development of educational institutions such as the UWI, and appeals, I don't know if I'm talking to the right audience now, because the young people, I don't see many of you around, appeals to the present generation of graduates to rekindle the flames lit by Professor Emeritus Magnus when he formalized ChemSAF over 20 years ago. Locally and internationally, some of the strongest institutions have strong alumni as their backbone. In fact, admission to colleges like our own university, our former university, London University in England, and Harvard University, weigh heavily on recommendations by alumni who want to make sure that the reputation of their institutions are sustained by the caliber of the new recruits. There is a Netflix, if you want to watch right now, for those who are into Netflix, called Admissions, and it outlines very nicely the role that alumni play in making sure that people get in or don't get into their universities. In a research document, I did some work on it, called The Role of Alumni as Stakeholders in Enhancing Quality Education. It's written by two Indian researchers, and if you know Indian names, they're best left as Indian names. The shortened form, one is Shasharoj, and there is, of course, one that I recognize very well, Prakash. But the first name for Prakash and the last name for Prakash, about 10 times as long as Prakash, so we won't go there. The researchers, however, note that the reputation of an educational institution lies on its students, past and present. Faculty and staff also play a vital role. The reputation grows when it keeps, like the UWI, producing successful graduates, continuously intelligent, that must be an Indian term, innovative and effective in their fields. And Dr. Thompson did a great job a while ago, along with others, in showing just what UWI graduates' impact they can have on the economy. Alumni can help schools sustain their existence, I guess, adding that, through their donations and voluntary help. alumni can also be helpful in producing valuable, and this is one of the key things that you'll see about ChemSAF, financial, intellectual, and human resource. If a big chunk of money, and this I'm quoting, remember, that institutes require comes from alumni, it will help those institutions remain competitive. They can provide their students better technology, as is the case from the little bit old building to the wonderful unit ops lab that you'll see later, better facilities and a nicer campus. And there I end the summary of the report written by these two Indian researchers. So alumni associations like ChemSAF that you're about to see has a vital role to play in the life of the institution. ChemSAF. Ken Magnus may have recognized this when he formalized ChemSAF in March of 1998, almost 25 years ago. He notes in his 1998 launch message that it was formalized after observing the efforts of people like Mrs. Ermine Osborne Booth, who I understood celebrated quietly, privately, her 90th birthday a few days ago, Dr. Trevor Yee, Dr. Earl Roberts, and this was in the 70s and the 80s. Their foresight and groundwork in recognizing early graduates, along with the efforts of Dr. Conrad Douglas, James Rawle, Dr. Novelette Sadler McKnight, Sonia Allen, Dr. Merle Barrett, Dr. Hawthorne, George Blackwood, led to the birth of ChemSAF. I understand I must mention my name also, Patrick Duncan. As a registered, so this is no longer just an alumni now, it's registered. It's with the Company's Office of Jamaica. It still is. Bob and I, and Novelette and I, and other people have the challenge of resuscitating it so that the future leaders of ChemSAF will have an organization to work with. And it was registered as a non-profit legal entity. But we can cut that. So that's my little speech about alumni. Let me just walk you quickly through slides. I guess let us press this now. Yeah, okay. The Chemistry Alumni Association, as I just said, was started by Professor Magnus with a team that included Osborne Booth, Dr. Merle Barrett, and Dr. Trevor Yee. Annual awards, dinners to recognize outstanding lecturers and alumni were part of the original activities. The association became dormant when members of the team that I just mentioned retired. In 1994, Professor Magnus decided to, this thing works very well, where am I? Oh, decided to revive the association. Soon get the hang of this. What am I doing? Oh, next. Yeah, that works. The birth of ChemSAF. Here we have a new committee, a younger committee, at that time, of Conrad Douglas, James Rawle, Denniston Brown, George Blackwood, Joyce Spence, my name again, Patrick Duncan, Novelette Sadler McKnight, and we all met to decide on the new structure of ChemSAF. It was decided to establish it as a registered company, and the objectives, membership fees, and all the things that go with registered companies was established. It became known as ChemSAF, and I haven't figured out exactly how the letters ChemSAF works, but this is how it works. ChemSAF is a society of alumni and friends of the Department of Chemistry, MONA. It was launched, as I said before, in March 1998. It was launched at a nice luncheon held at the Laurentian Jamaica Pegasus. The guest speaker was the then Minister of Commerce and Technology, the Honorable Philip Paulwell. It was chaired by Professor Magnus, and it was attended by graduates of the chemistry department, faculty, students, friends, and members of the business the community. I think we've seen the slide already. Here we have Dr. Roberts, Professor Das Gupta, Layla, Honorable Philip Paulwell, and Professor Ken Magnus at the launch. Some more pictures of slides of the launch. See how well attended it was. It was a major function that day. In the words of the chairman, Professor Magnus, at the launch, he said that KEMSAF, Mona Limited, will be an instrument through which alumni can make positive contributions to the growth and the development of the Department of Chemistry and to help to ensure excellence in future graduates. Again, I note that last part, to ensure excellence in future graduates. The KEMSAF management team have called the names already, some pictures there, and I think you've seen just about everybody here since this afternoon. Here now we have some highlights from some of the major projects of KEMSAF over the years. The first was a function to honor Professor Hassel. During the year of its launch, a function was held to pay tribute to Professor Cedric Hassel, who was a founding professor of the Department of Chemistry. In July, the same year, 3 bursaries, because Ken was always a man of his word. He says he's going to do something, he did it sooner or later. 3 bursaries were awarded to undergraduate chemistry students in celebration of the UWI's 50th anniversary. A KEMSAF newsletter, which was going to be circulated among all the members of KEMSAF, was launched. And a special function was held to rename the inorganic undergraduate lab in honor of Dr. William Bartley. In 1999, and this is very, very important, I think we've seen enough pictures of the old building not to refer to them again. KEMSAF was instrumental in securing $60,000 US from Alcor to assist with the construction of the new unit operations lab. Part of the story behind it, which a lot of previous presenters have alluded to, is that Dr. Douglas actually visited the department, I think it was in 1988, and he spoke with Dr. Magnus, who literally cried and said, "We can't continue like this," and showed him the dilapidated state of the old building. That's when he got into action. The total cost of the building wasn't $60,000 US, it was actually $225,000. And the University of the West Indies provided that shortfall, which is, I think it could, at the time, must have been at the time, couldn't be now, to 7 million Jamaican dollars. The major expenditure by the university being a reflection of its growing commitment to the applied sciences. Again, Ken. These funds were secured through commendable efforts. You've heard his name several times this afternoon. Dr. Conrad Douglas, KEMSAF's chairman, and Professor Tara Dasgupta, who was then the head of the chemistry department of MoNA. See there, and you've seen a similar slide to this before, Ken being very much involved. I understand he was retired at the time in the preparations, everything that went into the construction of the applied chemistry building. I won't say much more about this again. This is history. I think Ian said it's now Founders Park, right? I think here, the person who helped me provide this slide, and here I give credit to Dr. McKnight, she put this back here as a reminder that a big chunk of money that institutions require comes from alumni. It will help those institutions remain competitive. They can provide their students with newer technology, better facilities, and have a nicer campus. Here you see the 3 or 4, I think it's 4 of them. I couldn't find a copy of the 4th, I don't know why. Some of the newsletters that were released. The first one, of course, had to do with the launch. The second one celebrated the awarding of the funds to start the new unit operations facility, and then the actual building being built. Ken liked to write, and that's no secret here again tonight, this afternoon, right? And in the newsletter he wrote, as graduates, he started out by saying a few years ago the war rights of the individual, sorry, I can leave that part out. As graduates of the university, we all need to remember that we are all attained our positions riding on the backs of those who paid for our education. We must think of the need to pay back and think of those who have gone before and the sacrifices made to bring Jamaica to, as a spelling error there, to what it is today, with its numerous untapped resources and heritage. Let us remember that we are all in our own special way, that we all in our own special way can and should pay back for our forerunners' sake by helping to move Jamaica forward. And that has been Ken all along. Here you've seen this already, right? Most aptly, in 2007, the university renamed the Applied Chemistry Lab, the Unit Ops Lab, as the Kenneth Magnus Building Applied Chemistry Teaching and Research Laboratory. There's a picture of Ken standing quite proudly, I imagine, beside the sign. In 2008, the ChemSAF loved celebrations, and there's no secret about that. A ChemSAF dinner on Friday, the 18th of July, to celebrate the university's 10th anniversary, was well attended by 200 braving the stormy weather that night. 4 special, because the scholarships continued, anniversary scholarships were awarded in honor of former heads of departments of chemistry. There was the Gerald Layla Scholarship, the Ken Magnus Scholarship, the Earl Roberts Scholarship, and the Tara Dasgupta Scholarship. I'm not sure who is receiving what here, but I'm sure it's Ken being given something by Professor Rees, I'm sure of that. In 2010, Ken was always writing. ChemSAF successfully secured funds for the publication and launch of a book on the history of the university's chemistry department, authored by none other but Ken Magnus himself, with assistance by the one who's behind all of these slideshows, Professor Robert Lancashire. The launch was held at Founders Park, was sponsored to the tune of $250,000 by the Bank of Nova Scotia, Scotiabank, and again, those funds were secured by Dr. Conrad Douglas. That's a picture of the cover of the book. Everybody there enjoying the book. The Ken is not in this picture, but that's a little fun, okay? Here I found on the internet when I was researching Conrad Douglas, the chairman of ChemSAF, a nice slide. It said he's one of Jamaica's overachievers, and it highlights here the fact that he designed and built the third world's first multivariant continuous pilot plant, which is capable of handling all types of bauxite. I hope somebody knows what all of that means. The current management team of KEMSAF, President, Dr. Donna, is Conrad Douglas, Treasurer, Mr. Hawthorne Watson, Secretary, Dr. Noblet McKnight, Sadler McKnight, News Editor, I'm the newspaper man, Patrick Duncan. Other members include Mr. James Roll, Miss Sonia Allen, Dr. Joyce Spence, and Professor William Mulder. Yeah. I don't like the term on this slide, but it says that KEMSAF's president, Dr. Dr. Conrad Douglas, bought the entire stock. Let's take the word dead out of it. The book was never dead, eh? The entire stock of the book on the history of the Department of Chemistry for $400,000, under the auspices of KEMSAF, of course. And then he donated the proceeds to the department and distributed the books throughout Jamaica's school system to the NCSD. I think, Lilith, you know what that means, right? The National Council of Science and Technology, thanks. And STEM, you know what that one means? See, she's well involved in the school system, right? Science, technology, education, engineering, and mathematics. Can't leave out the maths, can we? Okay. There's another book produced in 2020. This was written by Conrad Douglas and Professor Lancashire. Anything Conrad does, you learn. He does it under the auspices of KEMSAF. It's called From Logwood to Slowpoke. I don't know what the Slowpoke means there. I must get the book. A biography of, it's what? Oh, the nuclear machine. That's what it's called, Slowpoke. I hear you. A biography by Professor Gerald Ada. Copies are again donated to the principal of Mona, the head of the Department of Chemistry, and the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, UEI and Mona. I guess there's a presentation of the 2020 book. These masks nowadays, you can't recognize anyone, can we? No, I started by saying KEMSAF needs to live on. The engine, the car, started up in 1998, is in need of, revamping, re-engineering. Whether it be an electric car or some of the other fancier ones that we've seen being offered about. But somebody has to continue the legacy of Professor Magnus, Dr. Douglas, and others. The alumni must be rekindled. The new generation of graduates, and I hope there are a few here, must see that it lives on. They owe it to the current students. We need, and I'll get involved in this if necessary, to set up a task force to look at the reasons for the lack of interest in KEMSAF and how to reestablish it. And we owe it to these guys, eh? But these nice young chemists. Look at them. They need KEMSAF. They need to know that there's somebody in the alumni who cares for them. That's KEMSAF in 2022. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had an afternoon in which we have explored the legacy of Professor Kenneth Magnus. I now invite Dr. Winklet Gallimore, lecturer in the Department of Chemistry, senior lecturer, to move the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I now can understand the reason why, when this was first suggested, that I was informed that this could not happen in a 1-hour session. This has been very, very tremendous. I've learned so much. The man is indeed an amazing man. My job is to give the vote of thanks, and I just want to thank all those who are here today, the Deputy Principal who was here earlier on, Dr. James Williamson, who's our Acting Dean, as well as the staff of the Faculty Office. They coordinated many aspects of this meeting this evening, for which we are truly grateful. Now, I don't know if there's an official organizing committee, but I know that Dr. Novlet Sadler McKnight was very instrumental. Dr. Donna Minot-Cates was also very instrumental. Thank you very much, Prof. Lancashire, as well. All of our presenters, we want to thank you all for giving us a comprehensive overview on the man and his work. Dr. Nelson, Dr. Thompson, Dr. Johnson is in absence, Dr. Coley, Dr. Thompson, other Dr. Thompson, and Mr. Duncan. And of course, Dr. Conrad Douglas has been mentioned many times. And we also want to, of course, acknowledge KEMSAF. And as we wrap up, we want to thank you all for being here. And those of you online as well, we thank you for joining us in this time of honoring and celebrating the man. The MIT staff, thank you for recording this. We appreciate that. And there are persons, I believe there's some refreshment on the outside, so we want to thank those for preparing that refreshment as well. And of course, we have with us, and we're really very grateful to have Andrea in our presence, and a sister of sorts, I understand, as well. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Blessings.